Hello, and welcome to today's Creative Champions Network session on the future of philanthropy. My name is Michelle Yeung, lead of the Creative Champions Network. The Creative Champions Network supports the 2,000 plus arts board members in Toronto and arts leaders in engaging in good governance and is fueled by knowledge sharing and skills development. Today, we are meeting virtually and residing on the traditional territories of many nations. I, in particular, am joining from Toronto on the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and that this land is now home to many diverse nations, Inuit, Métis, and Métis people. These lands are covered by Treaty 13 and the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt, and reminds us of the responsibility we all share in caring for this land and each other. This land acknowledgement serves as a reminder of our collective roles in truth and reconciliation. I invite you to share where you are joining us today in the chat. From the most recent Pulse survey conducted by the Canada Council for the Arts, it revealed that 7 out of 10 arts organizations have been experiencing financial insecurity and instability over the last 2 years. In the fall, this network gathered to learn about how we can mitigate financial risk in a session dedicated to revenue diversification. Today, we will continue this conversation with a look into philanthropy. Please join me in welcoming our moderator, Peter Kingstone, Visual and Media Arts Program Manager at the Toronto Arts Council, Alicia Rose, Associate Vice President, Social Impact and Strategy at TD Bank, and board member of Jayu and Soul Pepper Theatre. Paul Nazareth, Chief Connector of Connectworking Generosity Education, and board member of Word on the Street. And Aneil Gokhale, Director of Philanthropy, Toronto Foundation, and board member of Visions of Science Network for Learning. These amazing people will provide insights on addressing current challenges in philanthropy, as well as share sustainable practices for arts leaders and board members to rebuild and adapt to the sector's evolving landscape, as well as the future of philanthropy. For everyone to note, this session is going to be recorded and will be shared as a resource following the session. ASL interpretation is being provided by Joanne and Rogue, and the panelists will field questions during the Q&A period after the discussion. Please use the chat if you have a question. Now I'm going to pass it over to Peter. Over to you to kick off the session.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle. And it's so great to see so many people participating. And I like that the fact that you said that I'm some sort of knowledge person around the subject. I'd like to dispel that notion and say that I spent many years being on boards of directors, and this was always something that I tried to deal with. We tried to think through without that much success, but we were hoping. We never reached out to the wonderful people that we have around the table today, and I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to say. I work with many organizations across the city of Toronto in the visual media arts field, and they always have questions around fundraising. So I've taken some of those questions and the questions I had as a past board member, and I'm going to pose those to our 3 panelists today. And yes, we will be here for the last 15 minutes to answer any of your questions. So hopefully this is a wonderful conversation. So you've read all their bios, so we don't have to go through that. We can just jump right into questions. So a question that I've always wondered, how do I identify and approach the right prospects for support, including individuals, corporations, or foundations. Maybe we'll start with Paul, if he can give us an answer to that.
Indeed. And, just to frame this as well, the question, as we were saying, how do I identify, approach, ask, engage, and also ask again the right prospects? To take a step back and frame this, though, we also got to talk about what are we talking about? Our colleagues here today, Alicia and Aneil, represent different houses of fundraising. I'm really kind of in Hufflepuff. Corporate is Ravenclaw. I'm not going to say who Slytherin is, but we've got individual donations from citizens. We've got corporate donations, which is granting from corporations. We've got public and private foundations, and now donor advised funds, which are kind of invisible foundations. If we are just talking right now about the individual donation machine, I also need to say something impolite and unkind that arts board members and leaders need to hear. The deck is stacked against you. This is real. University Avenue from the Lake Shore up to U of T employs more human fundraisers than most of East and Western Canada combined. U of T's current campaign is $4.6 billion over 5 years. That's not real life. That's really tax collection stuff. And they've been empowered by Canada's tax code to actually engage things like stocks and wills and life insurance, private securities, etc. We have to be real today about what your capacity is and what you have access to. And so if we talk about identifying and all the fundraising, let's be clear whose role is whose. Staff's role, if you have a fundraiser or you as loan ED, is actually to build a collections machine using the tax and law of charitable donations in Canada. Annual fund cash, monthly donations. Most small charities don't know they can accept stocks through Canada Helps. I just heard they had a 39% increase to small charities. It was $57 million last year in stocks. Two small charities, and again, as usual, arts organizations are last because in the justification of donations, health and education, the heeding needs, United Ways will always come first. That's why you're not asking everybody. We need to be clear that we are actually identifying the people closest to our organizations. If you want a really easy, free doc to start with, go to Simon Sinek's Start With Why, the good old TED Talk. It's almost like an alumni conversation. Who went here? Who knows us? Who's been to our events? Who is ex-board members? Start from the inside out, from affinity. Who cares the most? Well, guess what? That's who's going to give the most. In Canada, we are now dealing with the most amount of Canadians with the least amount of kids since Confederation. And in fact, in my experience, and I've worked for U of T, I worked for the Pope here in Toronto, regional franchise, all the churches in Toronto, and many organizations. But when it comes to giving, in fact, there are people, especially in the arts. The arts is the religion of the mind in a lot of ways, and people will leave everything they have to you. If they've got no kids or their kids have done fine, that's the power of things like bequests. You need to start with affinity, their connection to the organization. All the board needs to do is not ask. You're not fundraising. You start conversations. Conversations with people that care about the organization. You are its ambassadors. You're always informing people who are in orbit of the organization what we're up to. And sooner or later, if you do it right, one of them's going to say, well, how do I help you with that? Then the ED or fundraiser says, here's how you help us. And they say, wow, that's the vision. How much does that cost? That's when you give them a price tag. And now we're actually just talking payment plan. In the old days for charities, it was just cash. Again, the CPA Canada tells us that Canada has the most sophisticated donation system in the G7 and Western world because we can take cash, credit cards, stocks, again, beneficiaries of life insurance, RIFs, in-kind, art. It's all there. And again, the challenge for arts organizations is how to get access to the knowledge. And truly, that's what our colleague Aneil is here to do. That's what community foundations do across Canada. Now that the banks are fundraising from everyday citizens, we need someone to represent us. And that's what foundations do and actually become kind of like the credit union for good. And that's what Aneil and I often will work on, receiving gifts of complex assets and then giving them to local Toronto charities. And only Toronto Foundation will also represent us to the donor and remind them, as Aristotle said, forget about Maslow, in the top 7 needs of humanity, arts is number 2. Awesome.
Great. Thank you so much. Aneil, you were sort of called out there for a second. Uh,
I did not want to follow Paul, but I was gonna leave that to you, Alicia, but I'll try. So here's where I'll sort of fill in the dots a little bit and add to what Paul already shared. I think so my understanding is that on this call would be representatives as board members of arts organizations as well as other organizations across the country, and then staff as well. And so I think in both cases, both of these camps can be thinking about these things. Who's already giving to you, and what other donors are like that? Who's giving to orgs that are like your org but not yours? Who's on your board and who are they connected to? And as a board member, who am I connected to? Um, and then another thought is have we engaged any professional advisors in our local area? Let me talk about that a little bit. So in terms of professional advisors, for folks to be thinking about, so Paul referenced our friends on University Avenue. For sure, a lot of the largest hospitals and universities across the country have very sophisticated networks of advisors that they engage. They hold breakfasts, they run seminars, they do training, and it's all around helping advisors be kind of helping them understand the best ways that a charity can be supported by their clients. And from my perspective, I really want small organizations to understand that that can absolutely be a superpower for you as well. You don't need to have a full-on advisor council where you're meeting quarterly and doing all the things, but particularly with arts organizations, you've got assets, you've got things for people to do, touch, and see. And I think it can be an engaging way to bring advisors in. And when I talk about advisors, who am I talking about? I'm talking about wealth management professionals. I'm talking about estate lawyers, accountants, insurance folks, family office executives. There's lots of different types of advisors that work in and help individuals, Canadians, of course, high net worth Canadians, but sort of Canadians across the board. They help them with their wealth planning and their estate planning. And philanthropy more and more is a part of that discussion. And so I think it's really important as smaller organizations viewing this call to be thinking about, am I engaging this group of professionals in a way right now? Or is this a group that I can be leaning into engaging more? And so thinking about ways that you can do that. Toronto Foundation does that with advisors in our local jurisdiction, and community foundations across the country do this in all of their local communities. There's over 200 of us across the country. So the last thing I would say is I think as a smaller organization, I would absolutely encourage you to get to know your local community foundation, whether it's Toronto or another city across the country, because the networks and the connections that your local community foundation can provide you can be really helpful and can really be that bridge between you and potential donors, potential board members, potential advisors. There really is that pathway that can really be connected for you. So I'll pause there, but those are some things that I would get you thinking about.
Great. So I'm expecting 300 emails to go to Aneil at the end of this call. Alicia, do you have anything to add or?
I mean, I always have things to add, Peter, so thank you. So first of all, Paul, thank you for not calling corporate funders Slytherin. We appreciate that. We see you. Um, I think I'll take this from an angle of actually how Paul really broke it down as to where we're representing and kind of the buckets that you might think about. When you think about corporate funding, I think it's important to understand that I think there's a notion right now, especially in the kind of economic environment that we're sitting in, that corporate funding is disappearing. It's not disappearing, but it's changing. And if you're still approaching funders on a corporate, probably across the board, but I'll speak from a corporate lens, if you're still approaching funders the same way you did 5 years ago, you're doing it wrong. And you're actually making the job much harder for yourself, in my opinion. I think the key today is really understanding where the money sits inside the company and what problem you're helping to solve. I'd like to dispel a notion, controversy alert, that corporations don't care. People care, People within the corporations might care, I care, but the corporation is looking to solve problems, looking to solve issues. And I think if you can start to articulate what problem your partnerships help solve, it gets you further down the path than sitting in the realm of caring. Caring might get my interest. I still have to sell this internally. When we think about corporate funders, it's not a monolith. We have different streams within our corporation, and I think it's important for people to understand how the enterprise works. So there is corporate philanthropy, and that's more kind of traditional CSR, and we're looking for social good, we're looking for community connection, we're looking for arts opportunities to really connect people on a local or a national scale. But then there's also sponsorship and marketing, which is actually a different budget. And that's really looking at brand exposure, PR value, audience engagement, et cetera. And then there's business integration. Like businesses have their own portfolios and they're able to fund, and they have issues like leadership development and innovation teams and HR, and they're looking to often partner with arts as a creativity tool for workforce development or corporate culture or executive training, those kinds of things. So when you're approaching an enterprise, it's actually really important to understand who you're approaching, what bucket you're trying to have this conversation, because throwing everything at the wall is confusing for the recipient and a lot more lift and work on your end. I think the other area that I would love to dive a little bit into is what I mentioned around this hyper local versus national, and that actually matters. I hear from a lot of smaller arts organizations, well, we don't have the same profile as X organization, and so we can't, put the brand all over the place. Sometimes that's not the goal. Sometimes it's really about deepening an engagement in a very specific market and a very specific community that, we don't generally have access to or we're looking to expand into. And so really understanding the goals of the enterprise helps you position yourself as this is like a winning combination to leverage this partnership to be able to enter this market. And so that actually puts you in a stronger market position than an organization that might be based in a very urban center, but you can't really deep dive into some of the kind of the more local communities. The last thing I'll mention, because I know we have a lot to talk about, is where we are right now is a reality where you have to understand a enterprise's risk appetite. So some companies right now, we don't need to talk about the political environment. That's like a whole other session. But right now, there are companies who want to step into a cultural conversation. They want to lead in a cultural conversation. There are others who just want to fund the arts and they don't want to make any headlines and they want to be quiet about it. And there's others that are completely walking away. Like that's the reality of where we are. So understanding the climate and understanding the ideology and the positioning of a corporation that you're looking to partner with will help you be able to position what kind of partnership this can be. So you're looking for those internal champions who can also give you a little bit of line of sight as to where the company is going in times like this, and really positioning yourself in a way to make smart and strategic and also risk mitigating proposals putting forward to corporations at this time. I'll leave it there.
Great, thank you. Maybe I'll do you mind, we're keeping talking and I'll ask you the second question?
No,
okay.
Go for it.
How do I, you've sort of laid out the land for us of what's out there. What is an effective strategy to approach somebody, and then also how to turn them not just for like, a friend of a board member who's going to give me some money for a little while, but they'll be with my organization for the long term. Do you have any strategies to do such things?
Yeah. So I think, part of what I was talking about before around the understanding the goals of the organization really does help you in preparing something that actually secures sustainable funding. When you think about, okay, I have a friend who works there, my board member works there, that opens the door. But without really understanding the lay of the land, you might get a one time. You might get a one time kind of low amount. Someone is like, okay, I got to do this because so and so knows so and so, and I gotta do this. But what you want to do is position yourselves or your company in a way that really drives for sustainable partnership. And so that might look like, yeah, the first year you might apply and look at like a one-time grant from the philanthropy team because you have an in, and blessed that you have that in because that's always helpful. I'm not going to pretend that it's not. Um, but also, it is important for you not to just sit on, okay, so I'm just going to send this report and I'm going to put the pretty pictures in the report and I'm going to invite people to the show, and that's going to be that. What you're trying to do is to get your tentacles in. You're trying to get your hooks in, and you're trying to look at, okay, so we have a relationship with the philanthropy team, and through this grant, is there also opportunity from a sponsorship perspective? Is there also opportunity from a business perspective? What happens if we bring, a director of HR to some of our shows and kind of talk a little bit about where there are opportunities for evolution? Now, I want to be careful here. I'm not suggesting that you're going to get funding from all of these different pockets. Like, we talk to each other, so it's not as if you're just going to, be compiling dollars from each budget across the enterprise. But what it does is it allows you connections in multiple points. And I think that's the goal. You don't always just want this one entry point. You want to be able to expand that thinking so it becomes an integral part of, we're having an event and we want a speaker. We're having an employee engagement opportunity and we want to leverage one of our community partners. We want to do a tour, and so we want to bring some of our leaders out. You want to be the go-to for some of that work because that makes you kind of an integral part. If you don't have that connection, I know people believe that you put an application into this vortex online and then it just disappears, never to be seen or heard from again. And I can't speak for every corporation in Canada, nor would I ever want to. But what I can say is a lot of a lot of businesses actually put a lot of effort into what they put on their website, what they put in their annual reports, what they put in their corporate citizenship reports. Like, these things matter. Look at the language that they're using. Look at the types of partnerships that they're highlighting. Look at what they are not highlighting. Like, you might know that they partner with certain organizations, but they never highlight it. Why? Leverage what is being put out for public consumption. We don't just do it for our own good. We are also giving this as an opportunity for you to look at and see where you can align with what we're hoping to achieve. And sometimes I think people believe that I need to get to the person. I need to get to Alicia. I need to get to Robin or whoever on the team because I need to have the conversation. Great. But that's not where you put all your calories. Put all your calories in understanding what we want to highlight and what we're putting out, because that will give you your entry point.
Great, that's really great. Paul, yes, I know you have things to say, but this.
Yeah. And at the end, I'm going to expose the secret of Toronto Foundation and lay Aneil up for sharing that secret. And part of the reason I'm actually here is I actually spend most of my work and career in different types of organizations. My heart is with the arts. I actually just wanted to be a high school English teacher, and I wandered from Hart House at U of T into the first Word on the Streets 35 years ago. And now I'm on the board of Word on the Street. And I want to tell you, a lot of arts organizations are not going to exist in less than 10 years if we continue to see the city funding, municipal, public funding going the way it is. Our organizations are going to have to step up their fundraising. I don't think it's fair, but that's where we're at. And so when we think of the machine, I also, again, want to say what is not good. You're going to see is street fundraisers. Door-to-door fundraisers, more aggressive telemarketing. You know, there's actually an International Association of Fundraising Professionals, and there is an ethical code of fundraising. And a lot of these collection and fundraising methods break that ethical code. But you know, bottom line, the real code is the one in your heart. And it sounds like this. Ew! When people attack you on the street and you run into traffic, you know that's not good fundraising, right? So we don't need more of that. What we need is the machine. Again, think collecting, something like a festival. So many people are here. They love the organization. Is it easy for them to give? The old way was mail and links, even QR codes and things. I'm sorry. The reason why Petro Canada, who's raising money for seniors, Home Depot is raising money for kids, and Canadian Tire, I forget even what jump starting they're doing. The reason they're beating us in charity is because of point of sale. Tap to give, technology transactions, donate buttons and emails, and the number one way that banks have created community capital and fundraising was from securities and stocks. All the charities here with us today have the ability to do these things. If your board says we're worried about using this technology because of fees, please remind them that all of them are bankers and lawyers and all of their personal capital comes from fees. If we do not have the technology to collect, the more advanced technology will beat us. That is why you see the Salvation Army kettle, the Legion Poppy Box slowly moving to these kind of tap technologies. But we also have to acknowledge public fundraising is one way. We now have a massive $9 billion secret fundraising foundation network. They're called donor advised funds. We have the numbers. They're essentially a community foundation hiding in a bank or wealth management firm. There's 15, 20 of them in Canada, and they have $9 billion in capital. What we now know is that $9 billion is represented by 25,000 human accounts. So just like the Toronto Foundation has about 1,000 funds, I think more, you've got 25,000 of these people wandering around Canada with an average of $2 million in their pocket, actually soon accessible by their phone. Truly, if someone has a foundation with 50 grand in it and you're at your event and you say, you know what, you love this thing. How can we make this kiosk something that serves what your vision is? That's 5 grand. They will soon be able to text or hit a button on their phone with their advisor to get the money from their personal foundation to your organization. Are we ready for that kind of fundraising? The good news is you will not need technology. What you need is, as Alicia said, we always go back to in this business relationships. Are you ready to have the conversation? If you want to help us, here's the way. And then the board and you rattle off the payment plan. We take cash, credit cards, stocks. There's a button there. There's a tap here. There's a QR code there. We just want to make it easy. If you care, join us. But if you want that secret money, that's what Aneil's up to with these invisible foundations and the new kind of public civic donor who cares, but doesn't want you to know how much they got in that charitable bank. How do we get that money, Aneil?
Aneil.
Let me tell you. Okay, so a couple of things here just to make sure we're all on the same playing field in terms of knowledge. So when Paul references the donor advised funds, and I'm not going to say all those stats that Paul just shared because I don't know them as well as he does. But what I will say is I just want folks on the call, I think most of you will know this, but I want to make sure we all understand this. When money is sitting in a donor advised fund, that is money that has already been tax receipted. And so the donor has given that money. The donor no longer has technically control of that money. What they are now is a donor advisor. And so that money sitting in this account, this donor advised fund, is like a private foundation, but it's not a private foundation because it's held at a public foundation. There are 200 community foundations, 200 plus. And then as Paul mentioned, many of the banks, many of the other wealth management firms all offer donor advised funds to their clients as well. So this money is sitting in this, let's just call it an account for now, and it's waiting to be deployed. There are different styles of donor advised funds. So there are endowment funds, but there are also things called flow-through funds, which are more like a checking account. So literally that money is just waiting to be spent. And so to Paul's point, you're at your opening night of a show that your theater is producing, and you're meeting some folks that are in the audience, and you find out that one of them is saying, "Oh, my family and I, we just set up a donor advised fund, a small one last year to consolidate our giving." So that's a family that could easily make a grant from their donor advised fund to your organization. Most donor advised funds can give to all donor advised funds can give to qualified donees. I'm guessing on this call, there are also some non-qualified donees as well. A non-qualified donee can receive money as well. It's just a bit more cumbersome. One of the ways that a non-qualified donee might be able to access funds is through a relationship with a trustee. And typically the trustee would be the qualified donee through which the money could be sent. And so that's just a little bit about donor advised funds to ensure that we kind of all have a good knowledge base here. The other thing I wanted to share, Peter, in response to your question was thinking about partnerships. So I really want smaller organizations, arts, but of all types, to be really thinking about how their ask independently is one thing, but how their ask potentially in cooperation with or in collaboration with another organization could really add value and lift up both. I'll give a couple examples. So literally just this week, I saw on Instagram that Jays Care, so the charity arm of the Blue Jays, and Alicia and I are both huge fans, but these days we question that. So Jays Care Foundation hosted First Book Canada in the hallways of the Rogers Centre. I'll always call it the Sky Dome, by the way. So they hosted First Book Canada, and hundreds, I think thousands of teachers from all around Ontario were invited to come and access books for their classrooms. And so that's a really interesting partnership, right? So you have Jays Care that does a lot of work around sport and sport for development, and really ensuring that students and young people get access to sport and the knowledge that comes from that, partnering with an organization that's all about books, literacy, and really making that connection. And so you can see where that's maybe on the surface, you would say, well, these are two very different organizations, but how might they come together? And there you have it. Another example, so the organization I'm on the board of, Visions of Science, has done some work in the last couple of years with another great organization in the city called Layup Youth Basketball. And so again, you have examples where you have young people who are in a basketball program learning the skills related to basketball, nutrition, etc. But they're connecting the dots with STEM and learning how, the physics of a basketball shot or things like that. And so you can, again, start seeing where you can see connections between organizations. And so I would encourage and in fact, challenge all of the organizations on this call to be thinking about who are some of the organizations in our orbit that we could be partnering with. And the reason I suggest this is because when you approach a funder and you have an ask that is a joint ask and shows that ability to collaborate, that is very, it's very unique for a funder to receive that kind of a request. And it's disarming, and it's actually, like, as a funder, whether you're a corporate funder like Alicia or an individual or a family foundation, etc., it's like people love to see that kind of collaboration and want to support that where they can. And so I would strongly encourage organizations to be thinking about how you can go about doing that. I'm just going to check my notes. I think the last thing I would say, just in terms of your question, Peter, around strategies for securing funding, I think I want to encourage folks to be really thinking about where they're hanging out. And so that's in-person stuff, but it's also online stuff. And so I know online can be kind of gross, and there's lots of ups and downs, and there's just a lot out there, and it's a lot to take in. But I would say I mean, my peers here, Alicia and Paul, both really share quality, valuable content on their LinkedIn, not always their own. Often it's amplifying content of others. And so what I would encourage you to be thinking about as well is when you are trying to create your organization's voice on your socials, thinking about, of course, you want to talk about the things that you're doing and big those up where you can. But I think you also want to be thinking about how can you lift up your peers and others that are doing great work that aligns to your work or is in partnership with, because all of a sudden you can start lifting that up. And it's that whole adage of like all boats rise up, right? And so I just want folks thinking about, where would it help to comment on a post or reshare something or kind of just be part of those ecosystems of learning. And then you start getting invited to things because people think, oh, you're actually interested in this. Let's actually talk about this more. And so I would just encourage folks to think about strategies related to how you would do that. So let me stop there.
Great, fabulous. Yeah, I mean, collaboration, I think, is what we need to start working on and not see ourselves as individual organizations. I just wanted to ask one follow-up question to Aneil. The organizations that can access and the ones that can't access, are you speaking about charitable organizations and not-for-profit organizations? Are those the two differences? Okay.
Yeah, so when I say qualified donee, I'm referring to charitable organizations. I mean, there is a bigger definition. If you Google CRA qualified donee, you'll see the registered charities, but you'll see all the other designations as well. And then not-for-profits or nonprofits, you can be a not-for-profit organization that does not have charitable status. The main difference is you're not able to give a tax receipt. And so why that matters is probably less so in Alicia's context, but I'll let you kind of chime in where it fits, Alicia. But for sure, Peter, when it comes to individuals, if it's money that's sitting in a donor advised fund or it's money that's sitting in a private foundation, typically those dollars can only go towards qualified donees or registered charities. Similarly, if Peter Kingstone wanted to make a donation to somebody and Peter wanted a tax receipt, then you'd only be able to give it to a qualified donee or a registered charity. And so that's why a not-for-profit, in order to kind of play in that ball game, would have to have some sort of a charitable trustee that can support them being able to apply for, get that funding, and then receive it. Potentially, maybe Alicia, if you want to chime in a little bit on the corporate side, if it's any different on your end.
I'd love to chime in, Aneil, but I just got logged out of Zoom and back into Zoom, so I missed whatever you just said that I could chime in on.
So all I was saying is that qualified donees and registered charities can issue tax receipts, and so donor advised funds or private foundations typically only give to those types of entities. Because that's who they can give to as per their charitable status, whereas not-for-profits can't issue tax receipts. And so I just wasn't sure if it would be valuable for you to share from a corporate context how or if that's any different.
Sure. Yeah, so we're, and again, I can speak for the corporations I'm aware of. We are able to fund nonprofits as well as charitable organizations. But I think the key difference is when you look at TD specifically in Canada, we're not giving through a foundation. So in the US, there's TD Charitable Foundation, and I know some of the other financial institutions have foundations, and so that might limit how they give or direct, and I shouldn't say limit, intentionally direct where they give. Whereas from our seat, we do have philanthropic dollars that need to go back to social good, but can be through a nonprofit or a charity.
Great, that's very helpful. I'm going to ask Paul, what is an effective fundraising tool and when is the best time to ask? I mean, because there's all these larger fundraisers happening. You don't want to get in the middle of those. When do I ask somebody, and should I invite them to a big party?
Yeah. Actually, just to add one thing to what Aneil and Alicia were talking about, because I believe in a lot of ways the future of local and small charity outside of urban centers is actually small business. We often hear that small business is the biggest engine of Canada, but we actually don't have philanthropic engagement of these communities. And frankly, most boards of trade and chambers of commerce aren't actually that supportive of charity donations or our networks. So how do we get money from individual business owners? What's interesting in my work with advisors, and that's a lot of my job, to teach advisors in finance, tax, estate planning, how to do effective charitable donations. And we have writers like Tim Sesnick in the Globe and Mail, Jamie Gollenbeck in the National Post. And Jamie often says, he sits down with his small business clients and says, here are the tax benefits of a charitable donation and a straight up sponsorship, which is actually a marketing expense. And when they look at the tax benefits, very often the donor and the charity can do more if it's a sponsorship or a different type of gift than a traditional charitable donation. How would you as the charity know this? That's why more local small charities need to plug into their own advisor networks and advisors who also give a damn about the arts. Again, I got to tell you, this wonderful woman here in Toronto, Tina Tarantian, she keeps winning Global Advisor of the Year and Advisor of all this. She is with the McMichael through and through. She will stand at the doorstep when they come for it. That's what we need, is partners who understand the rules. But the top two things I would always say, and anybody here can Google it, we did a public free education webinar called What Boards and Bosses Need to Know About Planned Giving. I've left that world. But bottom line is stocks and bequests. Small charities need to know, if you want cash money, how are the biggest and the most...
Sorry, Paul, for the interpreter, you said stocks and...
bequests, charitable bequests in wills. And so if charities need cash money today, it's important to know you just need to open up that quarter. You can put a button on your website from Canada Helps today to accept stocks. They liquidate it, put the cash in your account. For future dollars, you need to play the lottery. And the lottery is bequests. Any one of your donors could leave you on average around $32,000, the Canadian bequest average. But actually for arts charities, it's lower. But if 1 in 100 of your donors is probably going to do it, have you asked them? And you don't even need to say, please leave us in your will. No. If you love us, if you know us, all your ex-board members probably have done it already. You just haven't talked to them about it. If you care, please think of us in this way and remember the charity in your will. Well, there's so many resources out there, again, we'd be happy to plug you into, but that's where networks like Community Foundations, Ontario Nonprofit Network, the Calgary Chamber of Volunteer Organizations, the more networks we plug into. And if anybody doesn't know, in Alicia's world, to understand corporate giving, corporate social responsibility, the future of its intersection with ESG is Spire Philanthropy, Brad Offman. And actually, that's a whole new world for us. Anybody who wants to understand more on the corporate side, we finally have a Canadian gathering of CSR professionals. So the world is more connected. You don't need to spend as much time connected to it. Just how does that money come to you? And who is out there representing to you, who can bring you more of those capital assets while you fundraise for cash?
Wow. I have so many questions, but and I could sit here just chatting with you three for hours upon hours, but I want to open it up to everybody else on the call just to bring some of their questions forward. Michelle, could you help us do that?
And while we're waiting for questions to come in, Alicia and Aneil, do you want to just have some final thoughts on that for like 30 seconds? And then I'll field the questions in the chat. I'm just checking in right now.
Great.
Yeah, happy to give some thoughts. And there's a lot of conversation to be had about the intersection between philanthropy and ESG in a corporate environment. So we can go down that road when we have a longer road to traverse. The one thing I did want to make sure that was mentioned in this discussion was the importance of capacity funding. So corporate giving is shifting, but capacity funding is not like an automatic sell, because companies are not generally in the business of funding overhead. It's really thinking about like the strategic investment. But I actually think that this is where the future of funding needs to go from a corporate perspective. So this is a bit of also a plea of a help us help you in how we position these kinds of discussions, because capacity funding, I think needs to be framed as an essential infrastructure and not as an admin cost. So it's the foundation of what allows the programming to be possible, as opposed to this application, we're looking to fund the salary of 2 new staff members, which I know and you know is needed, but really has to be positioned in the terms of here is like foundational efforts to allow us to better connect into communities, to allow us to be able to, facilitate your brand in a more, public environment, depending on who you're talking to. If you're talking to philanthropy, it's different than you're talking to marketing, but you need to position this in a way that allows us to see how that helps achieve the goals. But at the end of the day, this is now like a personal bugaboo. I think focusing on the programming is not the way to go because the programming is going to change from year to year to year. And so what we want to do is get in on a multi-year partnership on the foundational ethos of an organization. And I think the only way to do that is through capacity funding. So when I think about the future, that's what I think about.
Amazing. That's so great. Aneil, what did you think?
Yeah, I'll just add, so our guests on the call are really getting a treat by having Alicia here as a corporate funder who clearly has a big heart and really understands the model. I think her point, though, I will underscore it to say that corporate as well as funders like Toronto Foundation need to continue adapting and evolving because so many of us are pretty old school with the way that we do our funding. And so that's on the funder side to really keep adapting. But I think to Alicia's point, as grantees, as when you're applying for money, I think really not shying away from words like unrestricted, multi-year, core funding, like that's how this money should be, and only that. And when I advise any of the fund holders that we work with, it is always about trying to get them thinking differently about how they do their grant making and really thinking with that lens of unrestricted and multi-year very much top of mind. So it's so critical to be thinking that way, and I just want to underscore what Alicia has said, and I'm just going to put in the chat. So Toronto Foundation right now, we have a grant stream open. It's open for one more week till February 7th. All the details are there. In all the eligibility criteria, et cetera. So I'm guessing a lot of you on this call know about that, but for those that don't, please have a look. We've got a couple office hour sessions where you can sort of get your questions answered. But basically all to say, funders, when you become funded by us or TD or another organization, what's also important to understand is that funders talk to one another as well, right? And so sometimes there's examples where somebody may apply to us for funding, but then they're not quite the right fit for us, but we'll call Alicia or we'll call someone else and say, hey, we know what kinds of things you guys fund. It doesn't fit for us, but you should have a look at this organization. And so that does happen. Not by all funders, but there are really sort of forward-thinking funders that do think this way. And so I just wanted to make sure I underscored that. And then the last thing just to say, and Toronto Arts Foundation offers this as well, but from when you think about endowments are kind of a long-term thing for a lot of organizations. But when organizations think about reserve funds that they might have, I would encourage you to think about your local community foundation or in Toronto, the Toronto Arts Foundation as a partner for that endowment, because all of a sudden your board, your management doesn't need to look after a whole other thing. You can outsource that to a trusted partner that can take care of that for you and do lots of really good things to help you amplify your work. And so I just want you to know that that opportunity exists here at Toronto Foundation and lots of other organizations like Toronto Arts Foundation.
Amazing. That's so great to think through. I like that sort of call for operating funds, not just, one-off projects or fancy things like that. Michelle, what questions do we have?
Yep, so we have lots of questions popping up. What we'll do is we'll consolidate these questions as well and answer them in a follow-up email if we can't get to everything today. But our first question is, what are some best practices for maintaining donors and donor relations for a long period of time? And I'm going to mash this with another question that came up around what are the flags of donor exhaustion from the perspective of individuals, corporations. So I think those are kind of two linking questions that I'm going to propose forward.
Great. Paul, go for it.
I'd love to jump in here because I can hear a board member somewhere saying donor fatigue. You know what it is? It's fundraising fatigue. This is actually a Toronto conversation. I know there's people from all across Turtle Island here with us, but I'll tell you, I wear this nasty ring because I bought it at a church bake sale at my church. There's probably a ghost in it. It was on the bake sale table and it was like $20. And I said to the guy across the table, how much is the weird ring? And he said $20. And I said, oh man. He goes, so what do you got? Because there's never a point of sale. There's never a thing. I'd give you $100 right now because the fundraising was for the poor in our community, the people around our community. And there's people sleeping on a grate outside the church. $20. And I said, I don't have it. He goes, fine. What do you got? And I got teenagers. And I told them, empty your pockets, kids. All right, man. I got $4, a button, and a booger. Don't take this money. And he said, here's the ring, took the $4 and said, go away. Free yourself from fundraising, colleagues. Special events, transaction-based, that is just asking, that's pestering. Adding on telefundraising will not bring you more money or more donors. You need to think of it as you are a university, these are your alumni, and you are collecting from their goodwill. They want to help you. They want to see you exist. All these people will go, oh no, if you go out of existence, well, let's get them before the oh no. We need your help. And as Alicia and Aneil both said, we need capital dollars now. We need to save the thing. We need to buy the building. We need to start putting a line in the sand for who and what we are as the arts. So free yourself from transacting. Think about capital dollars and partners to do that. Again, I'm sure a bunch of us are going to share links. I'll put that on my LinkedIn today, a few webinars and links how to learn this stuff. But if you move away from the transaction and move into the relation-based and conversation, you will get larger dollars, longer-term dollars. Again, I started with Simon Sinek's Start With Why. His next book is an even better one. It's called The Infinite Game. That's what charities need to be playing, not by fiscal, not by capital campaign. Technically, our organization is immortal, and we can have multi-generational family relationships and conversations. Our founders were 2 generations ago. We should still be connected to those families. We can do it through relationship-based, through community-based, and using those connections and networks.
Great. Thanks, Paul.
Can I just add something very quickly?
Go ahead.
Love everything Paul had to say. The other thing that I would say from a corporate perspective, and I know that this is difficult, but collaboration is so key in us being able to continue to fund the arts in a meaningful way. Innovative collaboration that still allows for your identity and your mission to be able to be executed as your own organization. Soul Pepper just launched the Creative Collaboration Initiative with Obsidian Theater and Musical Stage Company, and it really is about pooling the resources to maximize impact. And when you're bringing that to a funder, it allows them to see partnerships in a multitude of ways instead of a singular one. And so when there's opportunity to do that, I would really, really encourage it.
Perfect. Thank you for adding that, Alicia. Okay, the next question is, how would you engage future leaders, our young professionals in the work of philanthropy, and to give to your cause?
That's an interesting one. Paul's going to jump in, but
sorry, I was about to voluntold Aneil because the Globe and Mail called the Toronto Foundation Donor Initiative the Philanthropic MBA.
All right, so I'll try to do this in a tight fashion. You can certainly, if anyone wants to do any Googling of Toronto Foundation and a program called Vision 2020, you'll probably come across some things that I'm going to talk about. But basically, many of you would know Toronto Foundation has a really detailed research report that we do every year called Toronto's Vital Signs. For years, we were looking at how to take that to the next level and really use it as a way to empower our donors, to educate, to really help them learn and understand, where the focus could be. And so what we eventually created, and we launched this back in 2018, was we literally created a curriculum where we had a goal of attracting 50 young people, and by young people we were focused on millennials and Gen Xers. We ended up being so successful that we welcomed 117 into the program, and these folks came. They set up their donor advised fund either as an individual or as a family, and then what happened is we actually created a curriculum where we partnered with a lot of local grassroots organizations in Toronto, and we delivered a curriculum for these donors to think about things like their values as it's connected to their giving, their privilege, what privilege it is to be a philanthropist, focusing on making connections with grassroots organizations one-on-one, learning about the impacts of climate, looking at bequests. And so we kind of had this whole thing. The thing is as a community foundation, we are quote unquote cause agnostic. So we can really be focused on the philanthropist. And so in this case, to answer the question, Michelle, we really made a concerted effort to create this initiative that was very focused on learning and education as it pertained to philanthropy. The problem with that is while it's wildly successful, it's also wildly labor intensive. And so, we're a 23-person team. So we're not like 50 or 100 people like some other organizations. And so we did what we could with it. We got in-kind support for it as well. But at a certain point, you can only do so much. And so to kind of really bring it down, I think it's really thinking back to as an organization, what are we good at? What can we provide that's valuable for our constituents? And then I'm going to lean back to the point I made earlier and the point Alicia just made around partnerships. This is where organizations potentially can come together to actually provide value to new donors. So think of First Book and Jay's Care that I was mentioning earlier. Imagine they started doing some collaborative efforts where both donors of their organizations were starting to learn about the things they were doing and also their partner. And you can start seeing how that kind of engagement can be of interest to folks. The last thing I'll say is I would encourage organizations to think about the value of monthly giving. A lot of younger donors, they think of their monthly subscriptions already, right? Like, so you've got a Netflix, you've got a Spotify, you've got all these things. So why not add a donation to Jayu in the mix, or a donation to Word on the Street into the mix? And it's $5 a month, whatever it is. But over time, that starts adding up, and it's sticky, it stays. Most people, when they set that up, they kind of just forget about it until it's time for their credit card to be updated. And so I really think that could be a really neat starting point, particularly for a lot of younger donors.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're 1 minute to the end, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So thank you so much, Peter, Aneil, Alicia, and Paul, for your insights and this conversation. What really resonated with me today was around affinity. Start with the people who you know, right? And then increase your circle of engagement through these people. What problem are you helping to solve? A core thing about talking about, somebody mentioned in the chat, relevancy and how you serve the public and the community. Mutually beneficial relationships. We're talking about alignment, partnerships, collaboration, embracing technology to increase your capacity in the various different ways you can raise money. And one thing that I always say to everyone when I talk about fundraising, because I'm a true believer in a culture of philanthropy, is about building meaningful relationships. And that's at the core of what we do here as fundraisers. So thank you so much again to everyone for attending today's session, and to the Toronto Arts Foundation staff for their coordination. As I previously mentioned, a list of resources, including this recording, will be shared with you shortly. In addition to the resources, you'll also receive a survey link, and we would love for you to let us know how we did today, and let us know also what you would like to learn about and hear from us for future sessions. We would also like for you to mark your calendars for our next session. On March 18, we will gather in person and engage in an interactive case study with the Toronto Fringe Festival. This session will include Fringe's staff and board to investigate their governance questions relating to the new creative collaboration and arts partnership with Soul Pepper Theatre, which Alicia mentioned, and included some more information from Musical Stage Company in the chat. And thank you again, and have a wonderful day. And I will hang on for another 15 minutes or so if you want to continue the conversation with us. Otherwise, we will see you at the next session. Thank you so much.